Rio wakes up and finds himself chilling in a realm of clouds, with an angel casually standing in front of him. First things first, the angel breaks the news. Yep, Rio just died. And no surprise here, it was another hidden run by the infamous truck cunt. But instead of heading to the afterlife, Michael, yep, the angel has a name, tells Rio he's getting a one-way ticket to another world. Now, unlike those other overachievers, Rio doesn't have to save the world, defeat a demon lord, or collect 7 magical socks. Nope, Michael says Rio has no mission. He's free to do whatever he wants. So, naturally, Rio requests a slow and relaxing life. Michael, being the bro he is, sets him up nicely with a basic rundown of this magical new world called Phi, where about 20% of the population can use elemental magic. Lucky for Rio, his most compatible element is water. To keep things cozy, Michael preps a starter pack that includes a small ice house, a 2-month food supply, and a protective barrier to keep monsters out. There's even a monster guidebook because you never know when something with teeth and claws will show up uninvited. With everything in place, Rio goes outside and tries his new powers. He shouts water ball, and boom, a ball of water pops up in his hand. Turns out, casting magic is easier than expected. In fact, he can even skip the chanting and just think it into existence. Naturally, he heads to the bathhouse, only to realize he can only make warm water. No hot bath equals no peace. So, he decides to make a fire. Problem is, he has zero clue how to do that. After some sun gazing and a light bulb moment, he makes a magnifying glass out of ice. Don't ask how, just wizard things, uses sunlight to spark a fire, and finally heats his ice bath. Not bad for day 1 in magical survival mode. The next morning, over breakfast, Rio reflects. Michael gave him food for 2 months, but he'll have to hunt eventually. A butter knife isn't going to cut it, literally, so it's time to train. He tries blasting a water ball at a tree. It hits like a wet sponge. Not very lethal. So, he experiments, compresses the water for a high-pressure jet. Great in theory, but in practice, it's more super soaker than deadly beam. He recalls Michael's advice, magic is all about imagination. So, he keeps practicing day after day. Eventually, his water jets get better, and he even learns to make hot water for proper baths. Though, controlling the temperature is still a work in progress. Next up, ice magic. This time, he tries forming ice straight from the air. It works? Eventually. Took around 3 to 4 business days, but who's counting? Sadly, unlike water, ice isn't as easy to throw around. Combat training isn't going great, and after hours of trial and error, Rio faceplants from mana exhaustion. He calls it a day. But when morning hits and his mana bar refills, Rio is back at it, because if he wants a chill life in a magical world, he's got to learn to chill and survive. This becomes Rio's daily grind for the next few weeks. Thanks to all the training, he can now summon ice instantly. Yep, no more waiting 3 to 4 business days. It's finally a viable attack. With his magical toolkit ready and his food stash running low, Rio heads out into the forest for his first real hunt. Right away, he spots a pair of animal footprints and follows them to a nearby river. While he's there, he finds some handy flint and realizes he can start fires by striking it against his sword. Primitive but effective. He also takes a moment to gather some detox herbs, because you never know when forest sushi might backfire. But then, growl. A low, rumbling sound behind him. Rio turns and freezes as a lesser boar locks eyes with him like it's ready for a one-on-one wrestling match. The boar charges, and since this is the first time Rio has ever been in a real fight, he mentally blue screens. Just before impact, he snaps out of it and jumps aside. Close call. Now that he's got his head in the game, he uses his magic. He whips up an ice track to make the boar slip, Mario Kart style, then follows it up with a series of ice spikes. Boom, instant, pointy death. After turning the boar into future bacon, Rio flips through his monster guide and learns that the lesser boar is literally the weakest thing in the forest. Not exactly encouraging. The guidebook is designed for rookies like him, but there are 2 ominous bonus pages at the end. One is about dragons, which, according to the book, can solo entire cities. The official advice: run. Unofficial advice: run faster. Not that it'll help. The second page mentions demons, but it's hilariously vague. Basically just says, if you meet one, you're doomed. Great. Super helpful. The next day, Rio heads out to hunt again, but surprise! He gets ambushed from above by a giant assassin hawk. This bird isn't just big, it's packing wind magic and slashes through prey like it's got built-in razors. Ryo runs while conjuring ice shields on the fly. He doesn't want to fight this thing, but he's definitely not outrunning it either. So, he counters with water jets. The hawk dodges and swoops down with a slicing wind attack, but Ryo blocks it just in time with an ice shield. The blow smashes across the hawk's eye, sending it crashing to the ground. The hawk eventually gets up, now rocking an eye patch-worthy injury, and flies away. But not before locking eyes, with Ryo, making it personal. That bird's got beef now. Ryo, still alive and mildly traumatized, is starting to rethink what slow, peaceful life really means. While running from the hawk, he also manages to get completely lost in the forest until late at night. While wandering, he stumbles across a glowing lake, and in the middle of it, a dullahan just casually standing there. And it's already spotted him. As time passes, Ryo continues training like a man on a magical gym grind. He can now hunt and preserve food with ease, and his magic is looking seriously dangerous. He can summon massive sheets of ice and slam them down instantly, and his water jets are powerful enough to slice through solid rock. Not bad for a guy who couldn't heat bathwater a month ago. But combat training doesn't stop with ice. Ever since the dullahan encounter, Ryo has gone into the forest every night to fight it. It wasn't listed in the monster guide, so either it's not a monster or it's just too high level for beginners. Either way, Ryo isn't backing down. Armed with his trusty ice stick, he charges forward, swinging like a magical baseball champ against the headless nightmare. This whole thing with the dullahan is less of a deathmatch and more of an intense training montage. The headless horseman totally outclasses Ryo in both strength and skill, but that doesn't stop him from doing his best, blocking attacks with his trusty ice shields, only to get flattened in seconds anyway. Strangely, the dullahan never speaks a word, but Ryo can't shake the feeling that this creepy, silent warrior has taken it upon himself to play battle sensei. Then one day, the dullahan raises its sword and uses water magic to extend the blade, surprising Ryo, who had no idea it could use the same element. After showing off the magical blade, the dullahan casually hands it over to Ryo, then walks out onto the lake like some mysterious boss character on his break. Some time later, Ryo is out hunting again when, bam, he's suddenly ambushed by that same assassin hawk. Only this time, it's black. Ryo figures the hawk must have hit the gym and evolved, all to settle the score. Heady, maybe. Terrifying, definitely. The hawk dives in, launching wind slashes. Ryo panics and throws up 5 ice walls. But Evolve Hawk means stronger wind slashes, and those walls get shredded like wet tissue paper. Cue full-on panic mode. Ryo zigzags across the field, throwing up walls like a panicked Fortnite builder, dodging incoming attacks. He finally sees an opening and launches a volley of ice spikes, but the hawk speeds up and dodges like it's in an anime tournament arc. Then it screeches. Not just a regular screech, a magical, high-frequency, ice-melting screech that disrupts Ryo's magic, leaving him defenseless. Great. The hawk hovers in front of him, clearly charging up something massive. Ryo senses electricity in the air, then zap, a bolt of lightning fires at him. Luckily, he channels his inner survival instinct, uses a stick as a lightning rod, not OSHA-approved, and jumps clear just in time. Half-fried and still twitching, Ryo prepares for round 2 as the hawk dives in for the kill. At the last second, Ryo whips out his ice sword and parries the talons. After a few intense clashes, Ryo spots a gap in the hawk's guard, thanks to his grueling sparring sessions with the dullahan, and lands a clean stab through its neck. The hawk crashes to the ground. Ryo approaches it, understanding its desperation. It lost an eye to him and pushed itself to evolve, all to prove it was stronger. But Ryo trained too, and in the end, he won. As he walks home, Ryo is shocked, literally stunned, when a dragon appears out of nowhere. Remembering the monster guidebook's warning, run, and pray, he freezes. But instead of roasting him alive, the dragon talks to him via telepathy. It's not hostile, it's actually searching for a black hawk that flew this way. Uh-oh. Ryo nervously explains that, yeah, he may have accidentally killed the hawk in self-defense. The dragon is surprised a human could do that, but doesn't seem angry. Instead, it notices the sword Ryo is carrying and recognizes it as the Fairy King's blade. For Ryo to have received it, he must have done something to earn the king's favor. The dragon, intrigued, decides to chat. Ryo, still pretty clueless about this world, jumps at the chance to ask questions. They talk for hours, sharing stories like old pals until evening comes. comes, and the dragon says it's time to head home. Rio thanks him for the chat, and the dragon thanks Rio too, saying it's been ages since he's had such a fun conversation. As they part ways, a scene cuts to Michael, back in heaven, casually going over Rio's reincarnation paperwork, and then he notices something odd. Turns out, Rio was granted a hidden trait, eternal youth. Weird, because Michael hasn't seen a hidden trait since that hero girl he sent to Faye 10,000 years ago. One day, Rio heads to the beach because he's been craving salt lately. But instead of seasoning, he finds a wrecked ship washed ashore. He checks for survivors and finds a body, but the guy's already dead. Just then, he hears grunting from the other side of the beach and, to his relief, discovers someone actually survived. Turns out, the ship was destroyed by a giant sea monster during a massive storm. The survivor, Abel, was sure he'd die, but instead wakes up in a warm bed with all his stuff neatly placed nearby. He heads outside to get his bearings but is met by Rio, who casually says he's glad Abel is up and about. Abel is surprised he didn't even sense Rio approaching and thinks his fashion sense is weird, but instead of being rude, he thanks Rio for saving him. Rio admits all he did was drag Abel's body back, and sadly, he was the only survivor. But Abel isn't too broken up, everyone else was an illegal smuggler anyway. Rio, still new to the concept of smugglers, offers to make lunch since Abel must be starving. Over lunch, Abel asks why Rio is only wearing a loincloth. Rio shrugs, he's broke, plus there are no towns nearby to even buy clothes. Abel's impressed by how well Rio is surviving alone. When he asks if Rio hunts with that tiny knife on the table, Rio casually shows off his water magic instead, filling a jug to demonstrate. Abel is amazed. On the Central Plains, only about half the people can use magic, which shocks Rio. Michael told him only 20% could. Someone's been giving outdated stats. After lunch, Abel asks Rio to take him back to the wreck since he needs to check something. On the way, he wonders why Rio doesn't use a magic staff, but quickly figures it's a money problem. To make up for his insensitivity, he insists on handling any monsters they encounter. Rio says that won't be necessary, but Abel wants to feel useful. When they reach the wreckage, all the bodies are gone, probably eaten by monsters. Abel's lucky Rio found him when he did. After searching, Abel can't find what he was looking for and decides to regroup with his friends, though he has no idea how far he is from the town of Lon. He fears it'll be a long, lonely journey, but then invites Rio to come along. Rio, curious about the world and with no real reason to stay, agrees, though he needs to handle some things first. They plan to leave the next morning. That night, Abel notices Rio heading into the forest, claiming he needs to meet someone. Suspicious but polite, Abel doesn't pry. Rio meets with the Dullahan, telling him he'll be leaving the forest soon, so this might be their last spar for a while. They fight hard. Rio has improved enough to push Dullahan back slightly, but the skill gap is still massive. Eventually, Rio collapses in defeat. As Dullahan walks back to the lake, Rio thanks him for all the training. Seeing Rio as a precious student, Dullahan gifts him a special robe, Rio's first proper clothing upgrade. The next morning, Rio and Abel set off on their journey. Rio takes one last look at his home before stepping into the wider world. But of course, no journey starts easy. Soon after, they encounter a boar monster. Abel asks Rio to stand back while he handles the boar. He draws his sword, shouts total impalement, and instantly blows a clean hole through the boar. Rio, stunned, asks what that was, and Abel explains that people who can't use magic rely on combat skills, techniques that let them pull off flashy moves like that. After a day's trek, they reach a marsh crawling with lizardmen. Not keen on a fight, Abel suggests sneaking around, but Rio senses they're being followed. When the lizardmen emerge, Abel prepares to fight, but Rio tells him there are too many, and then casually obliterates them with a barrage of icicles. Abel is speechless, but saves his questions until the fight's over. Afterwards, Abel asks what spell Rio just used. Rio shrugs, just regular icicles. But Abel insists mages can only cast one spell at a time, at least that's what some wind mage told him. Rio figures this must be a wind magic limitation since he's always been able to multitask with water. Later, Rio even conjures water for Abel, using a totally different incantation, because honestly, he just says whatever sounds cool. Eventually, they wander into a rock golem field, getting pelted with boulders. Abel uses his total impalement again, but the golems just heal instantly. Rio decides it's time for a new strategy. He asks Abel to back off, then summons a massive ice cube and crushes the golems with it, one by one. Only one golem is left, but it's not moving. They figure the golems drain energy from the ground, so when they fall, they're done. Inside the last golem, they find a massive magic stone, though it's a shame the others got smashed to bits. That night, while camping, Abel mentions that golems can also be found in dungeons. Rio's eyes light up. Dungeons. He's pumped, but Abel didn't mention them before because he didn't think Rio would care. Lucky for Rio, the only dungeon in the Central Plains is in Lon, their destination. Rio also asks about dwarves and elves. Abel explains, dwarves are short, strong, great craftsmen, and plenty live in Lon. Elves? They're more reclusive, living deep in forests, and Abel only knows one elf in Lon. The next morning, they continue north. Rio confidently says that past the mountains lies human civilization. Abel's curious how Rio knows this, having never visited a village. Truth is, a dragon told Rio, but he keeps that to himself. Abel would probably freak out. Suddenly, Rio senses danger. A giant griffin appears. Neither of them can win this fight, so Rio quickly tosses his stored meat to distract it. Abel follows suit, and thankfully, the griffin takes the offering and leaves. Abel remarks that monsters like griffins haven't been seen near humans for centuries. That means these mountains are keeping the worst creatures away, but also means they'll face even more beasts. And he's right. Next up, a pack of wyverns. Abel suggests sneaking past, but Rio is confident this time. He charges in, firing off ice spears and taking the wyverns down with ease, something that usually takes 20 adventurers. Abel is floored, but hey, he's not complaining. They keep fighting their way through and eventually make it to the other side of the mountains, one step closer to reaching civilization. Rio and Abel continue their journey, debating whether they should ever willingly face wyverns again. Rio's cool with it. More monsters, more fun, but Abel would prefer not to die. Thank you very much. That said, he's glad Rio took the wyverns down last time. They now have a hefty bag of magic stones worth a fortune. Eventually, they spot a thin road up north. Roads mean towns, so that's a win. Abel notices the path stretches toward what looks like Mount Everest to the east, so he suggests heading west instead. He recognizes the icy peaks, but stays quiet and just tells Rio that if they go east, they'll reach the town of Coyote. Hearing that, Rio is thrilled. He's been dreaming of sleeping in an actual bed. Abel, a little surprised, jokes that he thought Rio was more of a caveman who lives for monster fights. They discuss the local food in Coyote, which Abel praises highly, and before long, they arrive in town and hit up a restaurant. Over lunch, Abel tells Rio about adventure guilds, suggesting he registers since he's strong, and the guild card also works as an ID and grants access across the nation. Rio likes the idea, especially since Abel had to pay the gate fee for him earlier. Plus, guild members can trade magic stones and monster loot, though being an alchemist helps. Rio, a chemistry nerd, is now tempted to pursue alchemy. When the waitress serves curry and rice, Rio's jaw drops. This world has curry too. He chuckles to himself, thinking how other isekai protagonists have to invent earth foods from scratch. Yet here's curry ready to order. Naturally, he goes full mukbang mode, asking for seconds, then thirds. The next morning, he's still raving about the curry, making Abel wonder if Rio has ever eaten a decent meal before. Rio jokes that Abel must be keeping more secrets, an offhand comment that flusters Abel, hinting he might actually be hiding something. They continue through meadows and soon spot Lon, their true destination. At the gates, the guard recognizes Abel and is shocked. Word was that he'd gone missing. Abel just says Rio saved his life. The guard, grateful, shakes Rio's hand like they're lifelong pals. Since Rio isn't registered yet, Abel again pays the entry fee. As they walk, Rio realizes Abel is pretty famous and friendly with everyone. At the Adventurers Guild, Abel explains that new registrants start at rank F, but since he's vouching, Rio might jump to rank E or even D. Also, dumping all their magic stones at once might tank the market, so Abel wants the guildmaster's advice. Inside, everyone cheers to see Abel alive. Feeling like the awkward +1 at a reunion, Rio slips outside for a stroll, where he bumps into an elf girl. She notes his robe looks like the fairy king's attire, but leaves in a hurry before explaining more, promising to meet again. Abel eventually drags Rio back in, hyping him up as his lifesaver. Everyone thanks Rio, then returns to their drinks. At the counter, Abel pushes for Rio's registration, recommending a D rank. The receptionist is shocked. This is the Crimson Sword Party's first time endorsing anyone. Still, Rio needs to pass a physical test. Meanwhile, Abel requests a meeting with the guildmaster, who bursts in. Hugh, shocked they survived the mountain. Abel argues that anyone making it back alive deserves a higher rank. Hugh agrees to promote Rio, but before they finish, a team barges in. It's Abel's party members, Lynn, Warren, and Rhea. When Lynn sees Abel alive, she falls to her knees, unable to believe she's seeing him again. Abel walks over and apologizes for worrying them, admitting he would have died if Rio hadn't saved him. So, he tells them Rio deserves their gratitude. Hugh, sensing the party has catching up to do, excuses himself and tells the guild clerk, Nina, to prepare the materials for Rio's registration. As Rio tries to leave with Hugh, Abel calls out, asking him to wait by the guild afterward. They've got things to do. Outside, Hugh notices Rio's curiosity about Abel's popularity and explains that Abel's party, Crimson Sword, is the strongest in the city, and his absence threw the whole place into chaos. Rio asks if his registration will be done in dank, and Hugh confirms, noting that while Abel is strong, he clearly needed a capable partner like Rio, so there's no hesitation in registering him. In the office, Nina arrives with the forms. She asks Rio about his skills and whether he's ever been to a dungeon. He hasn't, so she recommends their monthly dungeon class, which Rio signs up for. He's surprised they have clocks here, but Nina explains there's a big one in the city center. She also offers lodging at the guild for 300 days post-registration. After the paperwork, she hands Rio his guild card, prints his details via a magic device, and registration is complete. Outside, Hugh is relieved Abel is back, lamenting how the city was a mess without him. Rio rejoins Abel, who takes him around town to sell their magic stones, planning to buy clothes and a staff for Rio. Rio appreciates it but is puzzled. He's fine without a staff since he's always carried a sword. Abel laughs, saying his sword is more like a glorified knife. During their errands, Rio peppers Abel with questions and learns this world has 24-hour days, 7-day weeks, and 30-day months, just like Earth. Combined with the curry he ate, he wonders if someone from Earth reincarnated here and changed the world. Later, Abel drags Rio to his welcome party, where they drink and celebrate all night. The next morning, Rio is exhausted. As he walks to the lodge with Na, she teases him about drinking too much and mentions how raw Abel's brother barely left his side in gratitude. At the lodge, Nina introduces Rio to his new roommates, Niels and Addo, who agree to keep things casual between them. Na then brings in a fourth roommate, Ian, a 16-year-old girl whose parents recently died, so she turned to adventuring. Na reminds Rio to attend class with Ian the next day. Meanwhile, Abel tells his party about Rio's insane feats, casting magic without a staff, killing wyverns with ice, and summoning giant ice blocks. Lynn doubts it, citing the known limits of magic, but Abel insists it's true. Rhea remarks that only the Inferno magician was said to be that powerful, though it's thought to be a myth. They also wonder if Rio could be a threat or ally to the Duhi Empire, but Abel assures them Rio despises that name. Meanwhile, Rio laughs and bonds with his new roommates, reflecting on how drastically his life has changed. Rio and his friends move to the special class for a professional course on the basics of exploring the Dees, aka magical monster mazes with a bad attitude. After the class, they'd head to a real Dees, which made Amun visibly tense, like sweating through your armor tense. But Rio, ever the chill one, told him not to panic just yet. They still had time, and no one wants to see him faint at noon like a drama queen. The instructor, now ready to wrap things up, offered to answer any final questions. Rio raised his hand and asked if there was a way to fast travel back to levels already cleared, classic gamer energy. The teacher was impressed. Unfortunately, he said that while some Dees in the southern provinces do have that option, the ones in Lawn City definitely do not. Rumors exist, but nothing confirmed. Rio thanked him politely. Then Amun, still processing the info, asked Rio what instant travel was, and marveled at how Rio knew so much despite being a D-rank newbie. Rio just shrugged. It was something he'd heard, not Google searched. They moved to the city's Dees, located smack dab in the center of the city, which had the charming trait of doubling its monster population every year. No one knew why. The teacher explained the inner walls were built to keep those multiplying monsters from turning the city into monster stew. Amun looked at the whole setup like it was the start of a natural disaster movie. But the teacher reassured him, this happens every few years, totally normal-ish. They passed the guild building near the gate where normally adventurers check in, but since they were pre-registered, they could stroll right in. Rio noticed Amun getting nervous again and advised him to breathe deeply, not hyperventilate. Amun did, felt better, and they entered the first level, which was basically the tutorial stage. Nothing too dangerous, but they were told not to stray too far from the D-skate. Rio and Amun stuck together and soon sensed something ahead. Amun drew his sword like a nervous anime sidekick, but Rio, cool as ever, pinpointed the location. He froze the creature, a beginner monster known as a soldier ant, and told Amun to go for the neck. Teamwork made the dream work. Amun pierced the ant's neck and landed the finishing blow. Both were thrilled, like kids who just beat their first boss fight. Rio, always the sentimental adventurer, suggested they take the ant's magic stone as a memento of their first successful hunt. Amun, ever the rule follower, asked if that was allowed. Rio reminded him, "We're adventurers now. Loot is life." He showed the stone and proudly declared it a lovely keepsake. Amun was kind of in awe. Later at their residence, they celebrated their first Dees mission. Niels sipped his drink, wishing it was wine. But Ito reminded him alcohol was forbidden. Apparently, tipsy adventurers make poor dungeon divers. Still, Niels didn't care. A win's a win. Ito praised Rio and Amun for taking down a soldier ant on their first try. Rio humbly said Amun did the stabbing, but everyone agreed the magic stone was the real trophy. Then Ito asked what they planned to do tomorrow. Amun wanted to go back to the Dees, but was nervous about going alone. Rio offered to accompany him, even to level 3. Amun lit up like a kid being offered extra dessert. Still, Rio found it odd they'd encountered an ant on level 1. Usually, that level's infested with boring bats. Niels agreed and said he'd also heard of soldier ants crawling up to the first and second levels recently. Suspicious. Cue Abel's dramatic entrance. He confirmed that soldier ants could tunnel up from lower levels. Rio, always the sass master, told Abel not to mess with rookies. But Abel was actually being helpful, and then asked if the 3 guys were Rio's roommates. He introduced himself and casually dropped the fact that Rio is strong, but also has some personality issues, the polite way of saying he's a lovable weirdo. He asked them to take care of him. Niels, unable to contain his fanboy energy, stood up and told Abel he was his hero and asked for a handshake. Abel, being cool, granted it and advised Niels not to overdo things and to work hard. Abel offered some sage advice to Niels. Staying alive is priority number 1 for any adventurer. Niels, taking that very seriously, promised to train smart, not just hard. Curious, Rio asked Abel why he was at the guild so late. Abel explained that their mission took longer than expected, and they were only just returning. Right on cue, Abel's team showed up, and Lehia was not thrilled to find him in Rio's room. Ria told Abel to stop running away from his responsibilities and report to the guild leader. But Abel, ever the noble procrastinator, claimed he was simply guiding the next generation. Lehia, unimpressed, called in backup Warren, who stepped forward and unceremoniously picked Abel up like a grumbling sack of potatoes. Abel, thoroughly annoyed, pleaded with Rio to do something. Meanwhile, Lehia approached Rio and stared at him like she was scanning for magic residue. Rio, a little weirded out, asked if something was wrong, until Ria called Lehia away. Ria apologized for the chaos. They had to take Abel back to the guild leader. Rio figured as much. After all, Abel was their team leader. Abel, however, looked at Rio like he'd just been betrayed in a reality show. While all this unfolded, Amun stood there, stunned by the drama. Ita, on the other hand, was starstruck by Ria, convinced she looked like an angel. Niels continued to fangirl over Abel, which made Rio ask him, "Seriously, what do you like about that guy?" Cut to Abel's team on their way to the guild master. Leah admitted she shouldn't have stared at Rio like that, but she was curious. Was he really a magician, as the rumor said? Ria agreed. Abel reassured them they'd see Rio's abilities soon enough. The next day, Amun was in a hurry, but Rio, cool as ever, told him to take it easy. They headed to the D-skate, checked in, and not long after entering, they were ambushed by 2 wolves. Rio took one down with ice arrows. The other lunged at Ian, but he countered with a solid strike. A third wolf suddenly appeared and almost got Ian, but Rio's ice magic saved the day again. Amun then finished the wolf off, but was left completely wiped out. Rio praised him and offered a handshake. Amun accepted it with pride. Rio noticed that Ian's swordsmanship looked a lot like Abel's and asked about it. Ian revealed that he was trained in his village by a master named Kiro, who studied at the royal capital and taught the Hume school style. That's where Ian got his skills. Rio figured Ian had a bright future ahead once he got used to adventuring. Ian guessed Rio was a magician but clearly also knew his way around a sword. Rio explained his style was self-developed and that he didn't consider himself a sword expert. He then checked if Amun had caught his breath. Amun insisted he was fine, but Rio warned him not to overdo it. His fighting style was demanding, but if mastered, could keep him safe from injuries. First step, cardio. Run, and run some more. He also told Amun that he'd traveled with Abel for a while, and even Abel, talented as he was, worked on fundamentals every day. Genius or not, you gotta train. That fired Amun up. He wanted to work just as hard as Abel. Rio smiled. That was the spirit. The next day, Rio skipped the D's. He had other plans. He went to the library, where the librarian pointed him toward the alchemy section and suggested he start there. Rio gathered useful books, but soon found himself overwhelmed. So he stepped outside to get some sun. That's when the sun got blocked. Yep, an eclipse. And things got weird. Suddenly, a fire blast came at Rio, which he managed to block just in time. A mysterious girl wielding fire magic appeared, mumbling something about a human being involved. She was clearly not here for a tea party. Rio wondered if she was an Akuma. She blasted more fire, but Rio countered with enhanced magic and a flurry of ice. She added wind attacks to her moveset, but Rio blocked those two, surprising her. Then she got serious, revealed her personal weapon, and launched a flurry of strikes. Rio held his ground, matching her moves. As sunlight peeked through the eclipse again, Rio launched a wave of ice arrows, but the girl dodged them, all like she had cheat codes. He realized she was using wind to boost her speed. She soared into the air and dove down, but Rio deflected her again. She then charged a fireball, but Rio beat her to it. Still, she kept attacking. He fired more arrows, and this time, she blocked with fire and earth magic, but couldn't dodge everything. Some arrows hit, and she was injured. Rio saw his chance, soared up, and attacked, but she blocked again. Her wounds healed freakishly fast, throwing Rio off his rhythm. She pushed him back and prepared another massive fire attack. But then something unusual happened. Water droplets began falling. The first one hit her and burned her. She winced in pain and used earth magic to defend. She summoned a huge wave of fire as a final move, but the sunlight returned. The girl sighed. Her time was up. She hadn't had a fight this fun in ages. Rio told her to leave already. She smirked, saying he'd enjoyed it too, and this isolated place had strange rules. Her powers were limited here, and she vanished just before explaining what that isolation meant. Rio was left with one thought. What was that place? The girl then introduced herself to Rio as Leonor and asked for his name. Rio told her and even pronounced her name correctly, Akuma, which shocked Leonor since he knew who they were. Honestly, she should have finished him off right then and there, but Rio wasn't someone you could just eliminate during a coffee break. As the sun began to rise completely, Leonor said she wanted to meet him again. Rio, however, politely declined in his head, but she insisted that it was impossible for them not to cross paths again, and if it wasn't with her, it'd be with another one of the Akuma. She then made it awkwardly possessive by saying, "Don't let anyone else kill you but me. Your life now belongs to me." After dropping that dramatic line, she vanished. Rio, who clearly wasn't paid enough to deal with this kind of chaos, muttered that he survived by sheer miracle. If not for his special outfit, he would have had a hole in his shoulder. He was now exhausted and suffering from dizziness, classic RPG side effect. He dragged himself to the guild and discovered a fat bag of money waiting for him. He didn't even think this cash was in his account, but apparently, the guild master had already exchanged the wyvern stones. Suddenly, money wasn't a problem anymore, so maybe no need to grind side quests for a while. When he returned to his dorm, he found it suspiciously empty. He headed to the library to buy books, but peeked out the window and saw his dorm mates lying face first on the ground, clearly beaten up. Another student had done the honors. Niels said that if they weren't so drained, they could have taken them too. Wishful thinking, buddy. One of the thugs scoffed at the empty threat, but Ito called him out for talking big when he literally ambushed them. The bad guy just shrugged and said, "Do monsters and Deus warn before attacking?" Too bad his goons suddenly collapsed, having been whacked by none other than Rio himself. Rio told the main goon he was right. They shouldn't have warned him. Then he decked him. Niels helpfully identified the guy as Dan from room 1. Rio looked unimpressed and asked, "What do you want now, Dan? Gonna crawl away with your tail between your legs?" Dan didn't like that and tried to hit Rio, but Rio easily dodged and smacked him so hard he hit the ground. Niels noticed how badly Rio hurt Dan, while Rio figured he might still be a little too tense from that whole Akuma situation. He pulled out a healing potion and started with Ito, since he was a priest. They also decided to have Ian join their training. Niels felt slightly humiliated by how chill Rio was about all this. Seeing they were all kind of broken, Rio suggested they take a break and clean up. Afterward, Ito cast a healing spell on Rio, and it worked. Rio was genuinely happy and finally believed that Ito was, in fact, a priest. He thanked him sincerely. Ito explained that although the earlier attack didn't break any bones, it was dangerously close to being lethal. If it had hit the heart, game over. Rio admitted that his heart was the target, but luckily, he dodged at the last second. Niels, still shocked, asked, "Wait, if you're that strong, why dodge?" Ian chimed in with, "Who are you even fighting?" Rio just smiled and said that he'd tell them everything someday. To himself, he thought about how Leonor was an Akuma, and based on what she said, there were likely many more. He realized he had a lot to uncover in this strange world. The next day, Ito, Alman, and Nils head back into the dungeon. After taking out a goblin archer on the 5th floor, yes, 5th, Nils suggests they call it a day. They've barely been down there long, but something feels off. Goblin archers aren't supposed to appear this early in the dungeon, and since they've already made decent coin, there's no point risking it. Good call, because just a little deeper in, a monster was lurking that would have wiped the floor with them, especially with Rio off doing his own thing. Meanwhile, Rio is outside the city, having a dramatic post-battle reflection session after his intense clash with Leonor. While they were evenly matched in spell casting, her wind magic made her zippy as lightning. Rio sadly doesn't have wind magic in his toolkit, so he's experimenting with alternatives. His big idea? Use his water jet spell, normally for swimming, to boost movement on land. First test, a bit of ice on the ground, a few jets on his back, and he barely budges. Majestic fail. He plans to try again with more jets, but first, off to the library for research on alchemy and demons. Because who needs leg day when you have magical propulsion? Back in the city, Lihaya aka Lin is on a spell book scavenger hunt, searching for anything resembling that giant ice cube spell Abel swears he saw Rio use. Not even the forbidden books mention it, which means one thing, it's probably an original spell, but one requiring a ton of mana. She's still skeptical that Rio managed it so casually. Just as she closes her book, in strolls the elf girl Sarah, who greets Lin like an old buddy. Lin explains her spell hunting dilemma, and Sarah offers to help, though she's just back from a mission to the royal capital and running late for a meeting. Classic elf exit. Meanwhile, the boys, Ito, Alman, and Nils report to Nina at the guild front desk about their brief dungeon dive. She's surprised they're back so soon, but Ito explains and hands her the magic stone. Nina confirms it came from a goblin archer on the 5th floor, which is not okay. She hurries up to inform the guildmaster and thanks the boys for the crucial heads up. Upon hearing the news, the guildmaster is just as stunned. Goblin archers shouldn't show up before the 10th floor. He asks Nina how many high-ranking parties are currently in town. The options? Abel's party, Crimson Sword, and the White Brigade. He tells Cena to summon them all for a serious meeting. Not long after Abel arrives, but he's less than thrilled because he hears White Brigade will be joining, and their leader Phelps is not exactly his favorite person. Sure enough, Phelps is already there, smug as ever. After a frosty hello, everyone settles in as the guildmaster explains the situation. A rookie group encountered a goblin archer way too early in the dungeon, and it's likely a sign of a coming Tidal boar. It's been 10 years since the last one, so yeah, red flags everywhere. He offers both parties 100 gold up front, 200 more upon return, to investigate, not to fight. If they find evidence of the Tidal boar, they are to return immediately. Once confirmed, the guildmaster will shut the double walls of the dungeon and call for reinforcements from the regional knights. The guildmaster has already secured permission from the local lord to act, but he still needs to inspect the dungeon before making any major moves. So, he asks the big question, are they willing to take the job? Both Abel and Phelps agree on behalf of their parties, and the investigation is set for the next morning. Meanwhile, Rio wakes up early with big nerd energy. He's heading to the city's northern library to learn more about alchemy. Ito casually mentions that only D-rank adventurers and above are allowed in, but no worries, Rio qualifies. Alman does point out that the real juicy stuff, like forbidden texts, is B rank and up, so Rio shouldn't get his hopes up about accessing those. Bummer. Soon, Soon, Rio arrives at the Northern Library, which makes the Southern Library look like a corner bookstore. The place is huge, and he realizes he might need help finding the demon-related texts he's definitely not supposed to be talking about out loud. Lucky him, right as he's climbing the stairs, he runs into Sarah. Both are surprised to see each other, and the timing couldn't be better. Back at the dungeon, Crimson Sword and White Brigade are all gathered outside the gate, ready for the investigation. But right as the Guildmaster is about to open the gates, Abel gets that classic main character gut feeling and stops him. He asks Lehia to use wind magic to scan the first layer of the dungeon. She does, and it's not good. Over 100 monsters are camped out right at the entrance. Translation: the Tidal Bore has already begun. The Guildmaster wastes no time. He declares a state of emergency and calls on every available adventurer to prep for battle. It's all hands on deck. Meanwhile, back at the library, Sarah formally introduces herself to Rio and is pleasantly surprised to see him again. When she asks what he's doing there, Rio is about to say researching demons, but realizes that sounds a little sketchy. So instead, he goes with studying alchemy, which, while still nerdy, is less alarming. Sarah is intrigued. Rio casually mentions he wants to build a golem someday. No big deal. Sarah laughs because that's no small feat, but she offers to help him get started. She knows the library like the back of her elven hand. As they walk together, she asks if Rio likes reading. He says he loves books, but hasn't had many chances to read lately. The way he says it, though, sounds like he just escaped a 200-year slumber. Sarah chuckles, but Rio just awkwardly changes the subject by complimenting her being an elf. She admits it's rare for elves to live in human cities, so yeah, she's a little weird, but if staying in the city meant meeting Rio, she wouldn't change a thing. Smooth. While they're bonding over books and awkward elf compliments, the dungeon situation goes full apocalypse mode. All the gates slam shut, and adventurers take their positions on the walls. Then, with dramatic timing, the dungeon's main gates burst open and hundreds of goblins come charging out. Archers loose volleys of arrows. Mages light up the battlefield with fireballs. It's chaos. And it's only just begun. Whenever someone gets injured, they're rotated out of formation for healing so they can jump right back into the action, like a battle royale with a healthcare plan. But with goblins pouring in like it's Black Friday at a sword sale, even the Guildmaster is starting to sweat. Phelps tells his party to conserve energy, and Abel warns Lynn not to go full monomaniac too early. Sadly, they're running low on arrows, and Abel is questioning how much longer they can hold out before the goblins start asking for autographs. Luckily, a few moments later, Niels shows up with a few other bold and possibly reckless adventurers, hauling every arrow they could lay hands on, basically a mobile ammo drop. Along with that, Niels delivers a message from the Guildmaster. Once the smaller goblins are handled, Crimson Sword and White Brigade are up next to face the boss. A few hours pass, and most of the regular goblins have been reduced to XP. Now the boss is expected to show. The Guildmaster gives the signal. Both Crimson Sword and White Brigade leap from the wall, like synchronized gymnasts, with Lynn casting a magic spell to ensure a graceful landing. No broken ankles today. There are still a few goblins lurking below, so Abel and Phelps clear them out like pest control pros. Then it happens, the big bad emerges. But plot twist, it's not one goblin general, it's 3. That's bad. 3 generals usually means there's a goblin king nearby, which is like a boss fight on nightmare difficulty. Abel quickly forms a plan. He and Phelps will each take a general, while Rhea and Sheena go after the 3rd. Everyone nods like action movie heroes, then springs into battle. Abel dodges one of the generals and slices off its arm like he's ordering deli meat. Victory seems close, until he senses something off. Suddenly, he shouts for everyone to get down. A wind slash tears through the air, instantly slicing all 3 goblin generals in half. Dramatic much. Everyone narrowly avoids becoming Sushi, the attacker. None other than the Goblin King, and this guy did not come to mess around. Abel and Phelps charge in. Phelps tries to spear him, but the king's armor is tougher than overcooked steak. He falls back, realizing brute force won't cut it, literally. But Abel keeps going, dodges the king's attack using his perfect shadow technique, probably trademarked, and lands a strike to the chest. It's not a kill shot, but Abel never expected to solo the big guy. That's when he calls out to Lynn, who's been charging a wind bullet spell like a magical sniper prepping the final shot. As Abel jumps out of the way, she fires and turns the Goblin King into Swiss cheese, finally ending the Goblin crisis. After the battle, everyone heads back to the guild to celebrate their hard-won victory. By the time Ryo finally strolls in, he has no idea why the place is buzzing like a festival. The adventurers are laughing, drinking, and piling up empty plates, like trophies, while the poor guild master is buried elbow-deep in paperwork. He's got reports to write about the Tidal boar, payments to process for all the adventurers who helped, and the looming headache of royal researchers who are bound to show up demanding data. Some people get ale, some people get administrative trauma. At the party, Abel fills Ryo in on what went down during the Tidal boar while he was off in the library. Lin, who has been itching to ask him this in person, corners Ryo and demands to know whether he really can conjure thick ice walls at a distance. Ryo nods, casually saying, "Yep, about 40 meters out." Of course, he admits it took ages to master. Even so, Lin is floored. She's never heard of magic working so far away. She asks if it's an original spell and what incantation he uses. Ryo shrugs and says he just makes them up on the spot. Imagine her face when she realizes he's basically freestyling magic like it's slam poetry. Before she can press him further, Nils points out most of the food is gone. If Ryo doesn't hurry, he'll be left with cold scraps and regrets. As he runs off to secure his plate, Abel casually drops the bombshell. Ryo doesn't even need incantations. He just chants because he thinks it sounds cool. Lin is left staring, wondering if the universe is playing a prank on her. The next morning, Nils, Almond, and Ito drag themselves to the guild, only to find the job board emptier than their wallets. Ryo wanders by and asks why they're not out working. Turns out the dungeon is shut down for inspections after the Tidal boar, and resource-gathering jobs are basically dead since so much loot was dropped yesterday. When asked what he's up to, Ryo explains he's hunting for magic copper or to practice alchemy. Ito recalls it costs a fortune, 50 gold for a single piece. Ryo, who's rich enough not to blink at that, instead offers the trio a deal, 4 gold coins each just to search, plus 25 gold for every piece they bring back. The boys nearly faint. This is more than they've ever made in their lives. Ito, still half skeptical, asks if Ryo is serious. Ryo grins and explains that even if they succeed, he'll still spend less than buying in town. They're sold and the three rush out to start mining, like their lives depend on it. Meanwhile, Ryo hears shouting outside. Curious, he heads downstairs, where he finds Dan squaring off with a group of knights. The knights are trying to drag off a girl against her will, and Dan, in full heroic mode, shoves one of them aside to free her. Noble, yes, but the math is bad. 1 guy versus 4 armed knights. Just as their leader raises his sword to teach him a lesson, fate intervenes. The knight takes a single step forward and immediately trips flat on his face. Everyone is baffled when the knight faceplants, because there's absolutely nothing near his feet. The knight, however, refuses to admit he tripped over thin air and instead accuses Dan of foul play. But when he tries to stand up, he promptly trips again. Gravity, 2, knight, 0. Enter Phelps Heimline, looking every bit like the dad who just walked in on his kids breaking something expensive. He's appalled at the knight's behavior. At first, the knights puff up their chests, trying to intimidate him since knights technically outrank adventurers in the city. Big mistake. Turns out Phelps isn't just an adventurer, he's also a noble. And not just any noble. His dad, Alexis Heimline, was the former captain of the Royal Knights. The second they hear his name, the knights realize they've basically threatened someone who could end their careers with a raised eyebrow. Phelps tears into them for disgracing knighthood and warns them to get lost before he changes his mind. Once they scurry off, he glances at Ryo because he caught what really happened earlier. He'd already heard from Abel that Ryo's magic was crazy impressive, but seeing knights mysteriously trip from a distance, that's next level. Still, he keeps the secret to avoid dragging Ryo into royal drama, though he's grateful for the quiet assist. Later that night, Ryo is grabbing a bite at the tavern when Abel wanders in alone. Seeing him without his party, Ryo immediately jumps to the obvious conclusion. Ah, so you're sneaking off to the red light district. Cue Abel's panic and frantic shushing before half the tavern hears him. Using his genius deductive reasoning, Ryo decides Abel must have a crush. He briefly suspects Lin, but Abel blurts out she already likes Warren. That leaves Rhea, which only makes Abel flail harder, pretty much confirming it. Ryo won, Abel 0. Once Rio is done teasing, Abel explains the real problem. One of the dungeon investigators in town is his old friend, escorted by the same rotten knights from earlier. Tonight those knights are in the pleasure district, and Abel wants to stop them before someone gets hurt. On their way, Rio notices two unfamiliar adventurers lurking around, dressed head to toe in black. The moment they're spotted, the shady pair ducks out, suspicious. Sure enough, when Rio and Abel deliberately take a dark alley, they get ambushed. Too bad for the ambushers. Rio just drops ice on their heads and knocks them all out in seconds. Probably the easiest fight of his career. They don't know what the men were up to, but they'll be handed over to the guards for questioning. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the district, those disgraced knights decide to get revenge on Phelps. They sneak up on him, but suddenly can't move a muscle. Turns out the whole thing was a trap. Phelps knew they were dirty and had Shenna hit them with paralytic needles. With the knights frozen like statues, Phelps calls on her fire magic and reduces them to ashes. No ashes, no evidence, no problem. The next morning, as predicted, the research team from the royal capital arrives and immediately makes themselves unpopular by commandeering the town's entire food supply for the investigation. To make matters worse, Clive insists that Hugh McGrath reopen the dungeon and assign adventurers as escorts, despite not knowing whether it's safe. Hugh protests, but Clive reminds him that he has full authority. Luckily, the advisor Arthur steps in, apologizes for Clive's behavior, and promises to replace the stolen supplies. That earns Hugh's gratitude, though Clive remains stubborn about reopening the dungeon. Eventually, Hugh concedes and agrees to let them in. Hugh McGrath makes it very clear, if anything goes wrong in the dungeon, neither he nor the city of Lou will take the blame. It's all on Clive. Suddenly, Clive's smug confidence takes a hit, because now he realizes he'll be the one roasted if things go sideways. Still, after all the arguing he's done, there's no backing out without looking like a fool. So he reluctantly accepts the deal. But there's still one issue: finding adventurers to escort the research team. A little later, Rio is on his way to grab some much-needed lunch when a girl rushes up, asking if he can take her to the Adventurers Guild. Slightly grumpy about the delay, Hungry Mage is a dangerous mage. He helps her anyway. The girl introduces herself as Natalie Schwarzhoff, carrying a letter requesting the aid of Abel's party to defend the dungeon investigators. Rio is surprised. The dungeon was supposed to stay sealed, but Abel quickly guesses someone twisted Hugh's arm to reopen it. The closure made sense. Decades ago, right after a Tidal bore, an elite A-rank party went down to investigate and never came back. Their leader was basically S-rank Superman with a sword, and even he vanished. Since then, guild policy has been simple. Tidal bore equals lock the dungeon doors. While Rio is intrigued, his stomach wins the battle, so he excuses himself to go eat. After he leaves, Lynn asks Natalie if she's really from the famous Schwarzhoff family, renowned for legendary water magic. Natalie confirms it, so Lynn asks if she's ever heard of magic that could summon an ice wall at a distance. Natalie hesitates, saying it sounds impossible. That's when Abel chimes in, well, believe it or not, Rio can casually toss up an ice wall 40 meters away. He then warns everyone, half seriously, that if they ever consider picking a fight with Rio, they should just not. Even if they all ganged up together, they'd still lose. To drive the point home, he tells Natalie that if she ever needs help, and his party isn't around, she should go straight to Rio. Best emergency contact ever. 3 days later, Rio's friends return from their mission with 2 magic copper ores. Rio pays them 90 gold coins, enough for them to live comfortably for a while, which makes him their favorite person ever. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, the investigation team has reached the 7th floor. Oddly, not a single monster has appeared. Puzzled but undeterred, they push deeper until they discover a mysterious black square embedded in the wall. None of them recognize it, but Clive is ecstatic. This is prime research gold. He orders everyone to set up equipment and start analysis, with Natalie and the surface team ready to process data. Unfortunately, the excitement doesn't last. The moment they stick the monodensity gauge into the strange black gate, the entire team is instantly teleported away, vanishing without a trace. The surface team, including Natalie, loses contact completely.